Desperate Army veterinarian joins terrified canine. German Shepherd puppies in kennel. Then this happens. A military veterinarian walked into the kennel that day with shaking hands and eyes that had seen too much. He wasn't there just to help the dogs. He was there because he needed saving too. Inside, a group of German Shepherd canine puppies huddled in the corner, traumatized, frozen in fear. No one could get near them. Until he did something no one expected. He entered the cage, sat down on the cold concrete floor, and waited. What happened next left the entire base speechless. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more inspiring stories like this to you. Stay with us. This story is about healing, trust, and the extraordinary bond between a broken man and the puppies who helped him find his way back. It was a bitter morning at Fort Dawson, the kind where the cold seeps into your bones before you've had a chance to blink. The wind howled low across the base, rattling the chain-link fences of the military canine unit's training facility. Inside the isolated kennels at the far end, 6 tiny German Shepherd puppies pressed into one another for warmth, wide-eyed and trembling. They didn't bark. They didn't move. They didn't trust anyone. Dr. Caleb Ross, a 38-year-old Army veterinarian with a history as jagged as the scars on his hands, stood outside their pen gripping a clipboard he hadn't looked at in minutes. He had been briefed. The mother had been killed during a raid overseas. These were her pups, flown in last week, already marked for the K9 unit. But something was wrong. None of them responded to handlers, food, or even gentle touch. They just shut down. Caleb wasn't supposed to be here today. He was technically on leave, dealing with what the Army called combat-related stress injuries. But no time off or therapy had helped. The nightmares still came. The shaking hands, the guilt. He had walked the base that morning hoping the silence would drown the noise in his head. That's when Sergeant Mayfield had pulled him aside. "Doc, I know you're not on duty, but I think you need to see something." Now, standing before the pup's kennel, Caleb felt it in his gut. These weren't just scared animals. They were him, frozen in survival mode. He slowly opened the latch, the metal groaning beneath his hand. The puppies didn't move. He stepped inside and closed the gate behind him. No handler would have done that. They were afraid the dogs might lash out. But Caleb didn't see danger. He saw pain. Without a word, he lowered himself onto the concrete floor and sat cross-legged. No sudden moves, no eye contact, just breathing. He removed his coat and laid it beside him, the thin fabric barely a barrier against the cold. But he didn't care. Minutes passed, then more. One of the puppies, the smallest, edged his head forward just an inch, sniffing the air. Caleb didn't move. Another shifted. They weren't running toward him, but they weren't backing away either. He thought of Afghanistan. The crumbled building. The blood. The sound of his K9 partner Max, whining under debris, legs crushed. The moment he realized he couldn't save him. Caleb hadn't talked about that day. Not really. Not even to the Army shrink. But these puppies, they didn't need words. They needed presence. By the 10th minute, 2 of them were watching him. Not moving, just watching. Caleb slowly extended his hand, palm down on the floor, letting it rest a few feet away from them. And then, a tiny paw crept forward, trembling, hesitating. It made contact. It was barely a touch, a feather's weight of fur against the back of his fingers. But Caleb felt it like a lightning strike through the chest. His throat tightened. He didn't move his hand. The pup pulled back, then leaned in again, pressing its nose to his skin. That was the moment the silence cracked. A soft whimper. Then another. Caleb closed his eyes. He could feel it. The shift in the air. The other pups were lifting their heads now, noses twitching, eyes blinking with a cautious curiosity. One by one, they inched closer. Within minutes, 3 were beside him. Another nosed at his coat. The last one hung back, still watching from the shadows. Caleb didn't push it. He sat there for an hour. When Sergeant Mayfield returned, he stood at the gate, stunned. The pups were draped over Caleb's lap, nestled under his arm, pressed against his side. No aggression, no fear, only trust. Caleb looked up, his voice hoarse. "They're not broken," he said quietly. "They just needed someone who speaks their language." He didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. Something had been set in motion that day, something bigger than he could imagine, and the one puppy still hiding in the corner, he would change everything. By the next morning, word had spread through Fort Dawson like wildfire. Doc Ross tamed the pups. Soldiers, handlers, and even senior officers stopped by the K9 facility just to peek through the kennel gate. What they saw stunned them. A man who hadn't spoken to anyone in weeks, now sitting on a worn blanket with 5 German Shepherd puppies crawling all over him like he was their den mother. But Caleb wasn't interested in the attention. He hadn't slept all night, not because of nightmares, but because he hadn't wanted to leave them. The pups had finally stopped shaking. They had eaten, slept beside him, and even let out a few playful yips. For the first time in weeks, Caleb felt useful. He wasn't just saving them. They were saving him too. Still, one thing gnawed at him. The 6th puppy, the one that hadn't approached, was still in the same dark corner, eyes dull, head low, body tight with fear. Caleb had named the others Tank, Rosie, Echo, Scout, and Beans. But the 6th? He hadn't earned a name yet. When Caleb returned that morning, he brought scrambled eggs in a pan from the mess hall, technically against protocol. But these puppies didn't need protocol. They needed to feel safe. As he entered the kennel again, the 5 greeted him with cautious tails and low barks, circling his legs. But the 6th remained frozen. "Still not ready, huh?" Caleb said softly. He sat again, placing the pan of eggs beside him. Scout, the most adventurous, dove in first. The others followed, tongues lapping, tails wagging. Caleb watched them eat, then slowly turned his eyes toward the corner. "I know that look," he whispered. "You're not scared of me. You're scared of hope." The puppy flicked an ear but didn't move. Suddenly, the gate creaked open behind him. It was Sergeant Mayfield again, clipboard in hand, expression tight. "Doc, Command wants an update. These pups were supposed to start pre-training this week." Caleb didn't turn. "They're not ready. Command won't care. They've already assigned them to handlers. Said if they're too unstable." "They're not unstable. They're traumatized." Mayfield stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I get it, but you know how this works. No progress, they're off the program." Caleb's jaw clenched. "You pull them from me, they'll shut down again." Mayfield sighed. "You have 48 hours, Ross. Show Command something. Anything." The door clicked shut. The moment it did, Caleb let out a shaky breath. 48 hours wasn't enough. Not for all 6, maybe not even for 1. But he wasn't giving up, not again. He turned toward the 6th pup. "Guess we're on the clock now, little guy." For the rest of the day, Caleb didn't push. He simply stayed, ate his meals beside the pups, read aloud from an old paperback, laid down on the concrete floor and dozed while Scout curled against his chest. Still, the 6th puppy never moved. Not once. That night, a storm rolled in. Wind whipped through the metal siding. Thunder cracked. Rain pounded the roof of the kennel like drumfire. The 5 puppies whined and huddled closer. But the 6th? He began to cry. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't a whimper. It was a strangled, broken sound that made Caleb's stomach twist. He turned his head and saw the puppy trembling violently in the corner, eyes squeezed shut, trying to disappear into the wall. Something inside Caleb snapped. He crawled across the kennel, slow and steady, stopping just a few feet away. The puppy opened one eye, wild and terrified. Caleb didn't reach out. He just spoke. "I had a partner," he said. "His name was Max. He saved my life once, took a bullet that should have hit me. I held him as he bled out. I told him I was sorry. I've never said that out loud before." He swallowed, voice shaking. "I think you've lost someone too." The rain crashed harder. Then, slowly, the puppy crawled forward. Inches, then a foot. He didn't stop. He climbed onto Caleb's lap and collapsed. No barking, no fear, just raw surrender. Caleb's hands hovered, trembling, then gently cradled the puppy against his chest. "Welcome home," he whispered. "I'm calling you Ghost." He didn't know it yet, but naming that pup would change everything. The next morning, the base felt different. A heavy fog clung to the training fields, and the air smelled like wet earth and fresh beginnings. Caleb stepped into the K9 facility, cradling a thermal mug of coffee and a torn tennis ball tucked under his arm, a little gift for Ghost. Inside the kennel, the puppies stirred as he entered. Scout barked twice. Rosie wagged her tail so hard she almost toppled over. Ghost sat quietly by the wall, ears up, eyes alert. No longer hiding, but still holding back. He hadn't left Caleb's side since that thunderstorm. That night had changed something, but they weren't out of the woods. Caleb knew the army didn't wait for emotional recovery. These puppies had to be assessed, soon. Their first round of evaluations would begin in less than 24 hours, and most handlers doubted any of them were ready. But Caleb had a plan. He set the coffee down, knelt beside the pups, and placed the tennis ball in front of Ghost. "Let's see what you've got, buddy." Ghost blinked at the ball, sniffed it, then nudged it with his nose. Caleb grinned. "That's it. Come on." He rolled the ball gently across the kennel floor. Ghost's ears twitched. Then, instinct kicked in. The puppy chased it with hesitant paws, pounced, then skittered sideways like a clumsy cub. The others joined in, barking and tumbling over each other. For the first time, the kennel echoed with life. It was the breakthrough Caleb had been waiting for. Later that afternoon, he requested the outdoor enclosure, a fenced field behind the facility where the older dogs trained. Sergeant Mayfield raised an eyebrow but approved it. "You sure they're ready?" "I'm not," Caleb replied, "but I think they are." An hour later, Caleb stood in the grass with 6 puppies circling his boots. The wind had picked up again, rustling the trees and flapping the edge of the American flag overhead. Ghost stayed close to Caleb's leg, sniffing cautiously. Caleb knelt and pointed. "Echo, heel." The young female hesitated, then obeyed. "Scout, sit." The pup spun in a circle first, then plopped down. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. A low whistle came from the fence line. Sergeant Mayfield stood with 2 officers from command, clipboard guys in pressed uniforms who didn't look thrilled to be there. Caleb's stomach tightened. "Demonstrate basic responsiveness," one of them called. Caleb inhaled slowly. "All right, team, let's show them." He knelt in the grass, calling the pups one by one. Tank came first, clumsily but eager. Rosie followed, then Beans. Each responded to name and hand signal, shaky but engaged. Then Echo, then Scout, 5 for 5. But Ghost hesitated. He lingered near the far edge of the field, staring at Caleb. A pause. Caleb kept his voice calm. Ghost, come. Nothing. Ghost, come. Still nothing. One of the officers scribbled something. Caleb's heart sank, but then Ghost began to walk, slowly, not rushed, not afraid, each step deliberate. He walked right up to Caleb and sat, looking him directly in the eyes. The moment was electric. Caleb's throat tightened. He placed a hand on Ghost's head and nodded toward the fence. "You see that?" he said. "That's not a trick. That's trust." The officers didn't speak. They just turned, muttered something to Mayfield, and walked off. Caleb exhaled, slumping into the grass. The puppies swarmed him instantly, licking his face, chewing his sleeves, barking with joy. And for a moment, everything felt right. But the moment wouldn't last. That night, back in the kennel, Caleb found a note taped to the gate. "Ghost is unfit for duty. Transfer request pending." His blood ran cold. They were taking him away. Caleb stood frozen, the paper still clutched in his hand, edges crumpling beneath his tightening grip. The words blurred slightly as he read them again. "Ghost is unfit for duty. Transfer request pending." No explanation, no justification. Just a verdict. He glanced into the kennel where Ghost lay curled beside Scout and Beans, unaware that his fate was being signed away. Caleb's mind raced. The Army didn't waste time on uncertainty. If a dog didn't meet evaluation benchmarks, especially a pup with signs of trauma, they were either reassigned to civilian shelters, or worse, euthanized if declared unstable. That couldn't happen. Not to Ghost. Not after everything they'd been through. The next morning, Caleb burst into Sergeant Mayfield's office. The sergeant didn't look surprised. "I was expecting you," he said, setting down his mug of coffee. "You knew?" Mayfield nodded. "Command flagged Ghost's lack of responsiveness early on. He's the only one not making eye contact with evaluators. Doesn't respond to strangers. That's a red mark, Doc." "He's not unresponsive," Caleb argued, voice rising. "He's selective. He trusts who he chooses. That's not a weakness. It's intelligence." Mayfield sighed. "Doesn't matter what you or I think. The paperwork's in motion. If you want to file an appeal, you've got 24 hours. Caleb stormed out. Back at the kennel, Ghost greeted him with a low whine, tail thumping against the floor. Caleb knelt and let the pup bury his nose under his arm, safe again in the one place that had never judged him. He could feel Ghost trembling. Not from fear, but from something deeper. Instinct, maybe. Some part of him knew something was wrong. Caleb made a decision. That afternoon, he skipped the rest of his duties and drove an hour to the Regional Veterans Center. Inside a quiet office, lined with diplomas and dusty folders, he sat across from Dr. Lorraine Brenner, an old colleague and a licensed trauma behaviorist. "You said once you'd evaluate service animals off the record," Caleb said. "I need you to see someone." 2 hours later, Lorraine sat cross-legged inside the kennel, a notepad on her lap, and Ghost watching her warily from Caleb's side. "He's observant," she noted. "Hesitant, but calculating. His pupils aren't dilated. He's not panting. He's not overwhelmed. He's assessing." "That's what I said," Caleb replied. "They see trauma. I see restraint." She nodded slowly. "And attachment. That pup's bonded to you. Deeply." "So what does that mean?" "It means," she said, closing the notepad, "if you separate him from you now, it could undo everything he's worked through." Caleb felt his chest cave in a little. Later that evening, he wrote the appeal. It was unlike anything he'd ever written, raw, emotional, and deeply personal. He included Ghost's progress, the unofficial behavioral assessment, and most of all, the truth. that they had saved each other. He signed it and dropped it off at Mayfield's office just before midnight. The next day passed in unbearable silence. The day after that, nothing. Then, on the third morning, Mayfield approached Caleb outside the kennel with a manila envelope in hand. "They read your appeal," he said, handing it over. Caleb opened it with shaking fingers. Inside, just a single page. "Appeal approved. Ghost will remain under the direct care of Dr. Caleb Ross until further notice. Further evaluations to be scheduled under supervision. Status: conditional canine in training." Caleb let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "He's staying," he whispered. Mayfield nodded. "Under you. Don't make me regret it." Caleb looked toward the kennel, where Ghost now stood at the gate, tail wagging as if he knew something had changed. "You won't," Caleb said. That evening, Caleb sat in the kennel surrounded by 6 warm, fuzzy bodies. But Ghost lay curled on his chest, eyes closed, finally asleep with no tremors. There was still training ahead. Tests, pressure. The military didn't change overnight, but Ghost had a chance. And so did he. Summer came fast to Fort Dawson. The crisp mornings gave way to blazing heat, and the air was thick with the scent of fresh-cut grass and sun-warmed gravel. Training days were long, and most of the handlers welcomed the change. For Caleb, it meant more time outside with the pups, away from fluorescent lights and ticking clocks, and closer to something that felt like life again. Ghost had transformed in just weeks. Where once he froze in corners, he now ran freely across the field, his ears high, his steps confident. He responded to Caleb's voice instantly, and even started recognizing basic commands from other trainers, cautiously, but with effort. The bond between them had only deepened. They were no longer just man and dog. They were tethered by something invisible and sacred. But progress had a deadline. That Friday, Ghost would undergo his first formal evaluation for canine qualification. It wasn't just about obedience. It was about temperament, situational reactivity, and, most importantly, trust with multiple handlers. Caleb knew Ghost wasn't perfect, but he also knew the dog had heart and courage. And if those mattered at all in the Army's eyes, he'd pass. That morning, Sergeant Mayfield found Caleb in the equipment room, checking harnesses. "We've got a problem," he said. Caleb turned. "What now?" "It's about Ghost's evaluation. Commands changed the handler. They're sending in a civilian evaluator, some new consultant from DC named Tori Steele, behavioral compliance expert." Caleb's stomach dropped. "Why?" Mayfield shrugged. "Probably politics, budget cuts, new oversight committee, you know the drill." But Caleb knew exactly what it meant. Someone who didn't know Ghost. Someone who didn't care about their history. Someone who'd judge him by numbers, not instincts. The next day, the training field was eerily quiet. No wind, no barking. Just Ghost at Caleb's side, harness snug, waiting. Then a black SUV pulled up. Out stepped a tall woman in her mid-30s with sharp eyes and no smile. Tori Steele, clipboard in hand, stopwatch around her neck, and a no-nonsense demeanor that made even Mayfield straighten up. "I hear this one's been flagged for emotional instability," she said, glancing down at Ghost. "Let's see if he's salvageable." Caleb's jaw clenched, but he kept silent. Ghost stood still, ears back, sensing the tension. Tori ran the pup through standard commands. Sit, down, stay. Ghost obeyed, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. She introduced unfamiliar noises. Air horns. A dropped metal pipe. A flapping tarp. Ghost flinched, but didn't bolt. He scanned for Caleb each time. locking eyes before resetting himself. Tori scribbled something on her clipboard. Next came the approach test. Ghost had to allow her to touch him. She knelt slowly, extended a hand. Ghost sniffed, then pulled back. "That's non-compliance," she noted aloud. "No," Caleb interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "That's discernment. Try again. He just needs a second." She raised an eyebrow but complied. This time, Ghost didn't pull away. He let her scratch behind one ear, then sat, tail tapping lightly on the grass. Tori nodded, less cold now. Last was the trust test. Ghost was to be leashed by Tori and led away from Caleb for 2 full minutes. A lifetime in a young dog's mind. No visual contact, no voice commands. Tori clipped the leash. Ghost looked at Caleb, confused. "It's okay, boy," Caleb whispered. "Go on." Tori walked toward the far end of the field. Ghost went reluctantly, ears swiveling, head turning every few steps. At the halfway point, he stopped, refused to move. Tori tugged gently. "Come on." Ghost didn't budge. He turned fully around, his eyes locked on Caleb from 50 feet away. His legs trembled. Then, in one sudden burst, he broke free, ran straight back, straight to Caleb. Tori's eyes widened. Mayfield cursed. Ghost reached Caleb, skidded to a stop, and sat. Tori approached slowly. "Well," she said, "that technically fails the test." Caleb's heart sank. "But," she added, "I've never seen a dog override training for loyalty. That says more than compliance ever could." She bent down and scratched Ghost's chin. "I'm passing him, on one condition." Caleb looked up. "What's that?" "You stay on his team, permanently." Caleb nodded, eyes glassy. "Gladly." Ghost licked his hand. The bond was unbreakable now, but fate had one more trial in store, and it was coming sooner than anyone expected. A week after the evaluation, Caleb and Ghost had become something of a legend around Fort Dawson. Whispers of their story passed through mess halls and training yards, not just because Ghost had passed, but because of how he did it. The pup who once couldn't be touched was now following commands in high-pressure drills, reading his handler like a shadow. But on a Wednesday afternoon, just as training was wrapping up, the radio on Caleb's belt crackled to life. "All units, code red. We have a missing soldier. Last seen near Sector 12. Possible unstable terrain. Medical team on standby." Sector 12 was wilderness, steep wooded ridges with dense underbrush and old, forgotten foxholes from Cold War-era drills. Few people ventured out there, especially alone. Caleb's heart thudded. He clipped Ghost's lead to his vest and ran. By the time they reached the search zone, the sun was already dipping low, casting long shadows between pine trunks. Sergeant Mayfield met him near the trailhead, panting. "Private Jenkins," he said quickly. 23, radioed for help before his signal dropped, said the ground gave way beneath him. "We don't know if he's hurt, or where exactly he is." Caleb looked down at Ghost, who sat alert, eyes scanning the brush. "I want to deploy him," Caleb said. "He's ready?" Mayfield hesitated. "Are you sure? He's only had one eval." "He's not just a trainee anymore, he's my partner." Mayfield gave a reluctant nod. "You're on point, but be careful. This terrain's unpredictable." Caleb knelt in front of Ghost, unclipped the leash, and whispered, "Find him, boy. Go on." Ghost sprang forward. The forest swallowed him in seconds, and Caleb followed, ducking under branches, boots skidding on loose gravel. They moved quickly, weaving through trees, Ghost's nose low, tail stiff. Every few yints, he paused, sniffed the air, then bolted in a new direction. Then, a bark. Short, urgent. Caleb froze, heart racing. Another bark, louder now. Ghost was stationary. Caleb sprinted toward the sound, adrenaline coursing through him. He found Ghost standing at the edge of a narrow sinkhole, his front paws planted near the lip. Inside, 20 feet down, lay Private Jenkins. His leg was twisted awkwardly, and blood streaked the side of his head. He was conscious, barely. "Hang in there, soldier," Caleb shouted, already grabbing his radio. "We've got eyes on Jenkins. Requesting med evac now. East Ridge, 200 meters from marker post 6. Ghost lay down at the edge of the hole, ears back, watching Jenkins below like a guardian. Caleb knelt beside him. "You did it," he whispered, stroking the dog's back. "You really did it." Within 15 minutes, medics arrived. Ropes were lowered, and Jenkins was pulled up carefully, groaning but stable. One medic turned to Caleb as they strapped the private to a stretcher. "If you hadn't found him when you did..." He didn't finish the sentence. As they loaded Jenkins into the chopper, Ghost sat by Caleb's side, chest rising and falling in deep, calm breaths. "You just saved a life," Caleb said, his voice tight. "And they said you weren't fit for service." Later that night, back at the base, Caleb sat alone in the kennel yard, the moonlight casting soft silver over the gravel. Ghost lay beside him, head on his boot. Mayfield walked up, holding a folder. "Got something for you." Caleb took it, opened it. Inside was a single certificate, stamped with an official Army seal. Certified Canine Unit, Ghost and Dr. Caleb Ross. Below that, one line in bold. Status, active, mission ready. Caleb looked up, emotion catching in his throat. "Thank you." Mayfield shook his head. "Don't thank me. That dog earned it." As Mayfield walked away, Caleb stared at the paper, then down at Ghost. "I guess this means we're really in it now, huh?" Ghost looked up, blinked slowly, and gave a soft woof. Not fear, not confusion, confidence. There would be more missions, more danger. The world wasn't done testing them, but neither of them were afraid anymore. 6 months later, the photo hung in the hallway of the K9 unit headquarters. Caleb in full uniform. Ghost at his side, upright, calm, eyes locked on the camera like he knew exactly what that moment meant. Below the frame, first in his unit, last to give up. They had completed 2 missions together. One involved locating an injured hiker after a landslide. Another, helping calm a child with autism during an active evacuation. But the mission wasn't just out there. It was inside. Caleb had stopped waking in cold sweats. He'd stopped questioning if he still belonged. And Ghost, the puppy no one believed in, had become the heart of the unit. His confidence radiated. He didn't just obey. He led. Sometimes late at night, Caleb would sit on the floor of the old kennel, their kennel, and Ghost would curl up beside him like the early days. No words, no orders, just presence. "Remember where we started?" Caleb would whisper. Ghost would nudge his hand, eyes warm. And for a moment, everything felt still, like they were exactly where they were always meant to be. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Share it with someone who believes in second chances and the power of loyalty, trust, and silent courage. Let's spread these stories and honor the bond that can change lives.